become is desensitized, you know, through this whole ongoing thing. So what we need to do is become resensitized and try to bring a little sanity and bring our message, you know, peace, you know, bring the troops home. So I want to thank Vic and Charlotte and the filmmaker, and I'm looking forward to seeing this movie. Thank you.
Look, it would be absolutely unkind not to mention that one of the reasons that you're all sitting here is the work of Stuart and Ginger Paulson, because they help to finance the programs and make it really possible. And one of the things, though, that I know they like to be out front, but you know, it's like any army. You want to be out front and look behind you, and there's nobody there. You're alone, and they're doing this yeoman service, and we're really trying to get other people to join in so that we can increase the number of programs and do this more frequently. And it's not really a tremendous amount. Give us a call, and we would really, I mean, people have a commitment. One of the ways to commit yourself is to reach into your pocket and do something, okay? So, I can't even say without further ado, because we've already been standing here listening to this crap around.
So I guess I'll try to keep it short. I'll be here afterwards, and you know, I can speak as long as you guys want and answer whatever questions you have about what you see tonight. But I definitely want to thank Vic and everybody he just mentioned. This seems like a really great place. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to show the film here. And I definitely want to thank you guys as an audience for coming out, because as Vic was talking about, it's challenging to get people to come out and see movies like this. And there's a handful of other films that were made in Iraq dealing with all kinds of different stories. And we're all struggling to get people to come watch them. I mean, it takes time, it's a tough business, but this is a big crowd, and that makes me feel good, because that's why we make the movies, so, you know, to share them with people. And it's frustrating when the opposite happens, especially to make a film about something like a war that our country's involved in, that's going on right now, and then I'm not just talking about my film, but others, you know, that people don't turn out to see them. Because we often complain, you know, on the news, by watching the network news, we don't really get to learn or find out what's going on. There are now films like mine, and I can mention some of the other ones afterwards, that does give the opportunity for people to learn about what's going on. What that takes is people being willing, like you guys are, to come out and see the film. So thank you for that. I'll be here afterwards.
Also, after the Q&A in here, we can retire to the Sky Room, where you can talk directly to one another and to Andrew and continue the discussion. There'll be a reception following the film and talk, okay? So, gotta eat that cheese up. What else?
Eat the cheese. سألت أقول له رب العالمين، أقول له إيش أخذت مني؟ يحبه لما الله يحبه ما ياخذ. ده هذه شو زعل وخذ الرب أخذ صعب شيء صعب قبل الله كتير أمريكان.
Thank you guys again. I'm basically here to answer whatever questions you have about what you just saw. So whoever wants to start, go ahead.
I'll talk only into the microphone, one person at a time, and don't have a private conversation. Here we go.
I'll begin. I'd like to make one statement and then ask two questions. My statement is I'm disappointed, not in this, but I'm disappointed that the place is not packed tonight. My wife and I said that we thought we'd have to get her early to be sure to get good seats. And I think it's absolutely criminal that the place isn't jam-packed.
Don't make the people who are here feel bad, eh?
No, the ones that are here. That's fine.
Celebrate the people who are here.
Oh, absolutely, of course, yeah. All right, two questions. One, I was amazed that you were to work your way in, not only with the Iraqis, I could see that, but with the American military. I wonder how you did that. And the second question is, I think this ought to go out on video, ought to be made available to a lot of people through progressive organizations, and wonder if there are any plans for that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first I'll address your comment, and you guys should actually feel good because this is played at festivals and often had, sold-out screening at film festivals. It opened at Cinema Village in New York two weeks ago, and basically the morning after it opened, I got a call, oh, you're being moved to the small theater, and by the time a week had passed, we were down to one screening a day. So this is a really good turnout. So you guys feel good because you did come out for it. It's a really tough business, and what happened to me at Cinema Village happens to a lot of films, just because for all kinds of different reasons. But I'm always, of course, disappointed because I put a lot into this film. It was very important to me. And there is a feeling that I have that if people knew better what was going on, and if people were willing to look at it, then it would become difficult for it to continue. But you guys were willing, so I thanked you before, and I thank you again for coming out. What you can do is certainly tell your friends, and I'll jump to your last question about the DVD. Within the next couple of months, it's going to come out on DVD. We have partnered with a lot of organizations. They sponsored screenings, and that will be publicized through all the, anti-war organizations and, whatever organizations are willing to publicize it. So we're doing everything we can to make it available. It's also screening in 11 cities right now. Maybe more, we'll see what happens. So now I'll go to your question about access, and you talked both about the access to the American military as well as Iraqi fighters, whatever you want to call them, resistant fighters, insurgents. The American Army was fairly easy. For that, I needed a passport, I needed a press ID, and a letter from like a newspaper or a production company. So of course I had the passport. the letter I wrote myself and the press ID I made, and I had it laminated and shot it back. Actually, is just as valid as like a press ID from New York Times. They don't have any more legal basis to have that kind of access to be press. My understanding of the freedom of press applies to everybody, not just newspapers, not just people. And I have a production company. I mean, it's just me, but it's just as valid. So that's what I did, and some other journalists do that, working over there. And it wasn't too difficult. I got the access. It took about a week, and I was given an embed, and I lived on a base for a week. Only 1 week out of the 6 months that I was there, because as you can see from the film, I was primarily interested in not being embedded, but being free to, get a story from the Iraqi perspective. And the way I did, and I mean, being on the base and being with the American Army was really an incredible experience for me. And I almost wanted to start another home movie when I was with those guys, because their story is hugely important. And there are other films that have dealt with their story. One of my favorite is a film called Occupation Dreamland, where the filmmakers embedded for 6 weeks with the army in Fallujah, leading up to the first battle in Fallujah. So that story of the American soldier experience is extremely important. But it wasn't what I was primarily interested in. I was more interested in the Iraqi perspective. So my way of working, it was just me. I had a driver translator, and we went around in his beat-up Oldsmobile so that we could just interact with Iraqi people on like a human level. There's no way I could make this kind of film if I could only travel with American soldiers, or if I had guards or an armored vehicle. So I just approached. I didn't try to pretend I was anything other than I didn't try to blend in, because I would have failed. And the reality is, my experience with Iraqi people is that culturally, hospitality is extremely important to them. So I was almost always welcomed. And in terms of being able to make this kind of film, I would actually find it more difficult to do this kind of work in New York, where people are more self-conscious, they're more aware of the camera, more private, more suspicious of what my motivations would be. In a lot of ways, I found working in Iraq and getting this kind of access, I found Iraq to be an easy place to do it. Of course, there are challenges and dangers, and the most extreme situation was filming with insurgents fighting against the Americans, and that took some time. It took getting the right contact. At a certain point, I had a contact who was an intelligence officer in the Medi Army, and he liked me because I was shooting video, and he would actually want to get copies if I filmed, when I filmed them fighting and stuff like that. My experience with them, and what I started to feel is that these guys who are fighting, some of whom are genuinely willing to die fighting against the occupation, like they believe very strongly in what they're doing. And I almost realized, I was like, why wouldn't they want me there to help tell their story? So there wasn't even a conflict of interest there. They weren't so suspicious of me. They felt very strongly about something. They had a story they wanted to get out. And then, of course, there's Rod's family. I was in Baghdad. I was in that neighborhood, Kadamia, and I had no idea what kind of movie I was going to make. But Rod's friends actually saw me with my video camera, and they called me over and they said, "We have a story for you." And they told me their friend Rod had just been killed the night before. And my initial feelings were like, that's a pretty heavy story. Of course, there are thousands of stories like that. And at first I kind of thought, it seems like the story's finished. This guy was just killed. That sounds like the end of the story. But then his friend said, you know, come back the day after tomorrow, and we're going to go talk to his family, and we're going to arrange everything, and we'll bring you to his family so you can film them grieving. That's what they said, and that was their idea. And I was like, okay, I'll go film them grieving. And that was one of the scarier things that I had to do, showing up at his family's house 3 days after he was killed to film them in that terrible moment in their lives. But I did, and I didn't even interview them. I met Ibrahim, his brother, and I met his mother, and they just started talking and crying. And that's when I thought maybe there was a story just starting for the family of how they moved forward after having their son killed, you know, in such tragic circumstances. But the situation, the relationship was the same. It was them having what they wanted to share, which was a very good situation for me to be in. But basically that challenge is what I love about doing this kind of work. You know, how you get access to things that people might say, that seems impossible. And my experience is there's almost always a way. And especially when it's something that seems important, I like to find out how to get access and to get as close as possible. I think that's a long answer to you. Not long after that kidnapping started, the first battle in Fallujah, the first battle in Najaf happened within that first month. The Shia uprising began. Up until that point, it had only primarily been Sunni people fighting against the occupation. So yeah, the kidnapping started. Oh, and the Abu Ghraib pictures came out, all within my first month there. So that was exactly 1 year after the invasion. So I got there at an interesting time. All these bad things started to happen, and things got worse and worse. And you mentioned the kidnapping. During the time that I was there, 5 people I knew, you know, foreign journalists, were kidnapped, and living in the hotel that I was living in. They weren't kidnapped from the hotel, but, you know, they were all sort of the independent crowd of journalists who go a little farther and push a little deeper. And so, yeah, 5 people I knew were kidnapped. Two French guys who lived next door to me were missing for 5 months. So definitely, you know, by the end of 6 months, it had eaten away at me. And by the end of the 6 months, it started happening more and more in Baghdad. Previous to that, I knew, like, if I drove from Baghdad to Najaf, there were about 20 minutes of the drive going through Mahmoudiya and Latafiya that were really dangerous because journalists had been killed on the road there. But other than that, I didn't usually think I was in danger of being kidnapped in Baghdad until the end, when, you know, people were being pulled out of their homes and offices and kidnapped. So yeah, that kind of fear definitely started to eat away at me because it's always sort of there in the background, and you can never quite relax.
Yeah. I'll be down there in a minute.
He's got the mic back there. So.
I'll come down.
Do you foresee a civil war if the Americans pull out?
First of all, I'm very bad at those predictions, which is why I choose to make this kind of movie where you don't hear me talking, because I feel like, what do I know? It's very hard to know. But, you know, which is why I try to let people speak for themselves and, you know, focus on their experience within that context of everything that we hear about that's going on. In terms of a civil war, I mean, you could say there's been a civil war going on in Iraq for the past couple of years, and it's been escalating. It's certainly, there's, you know, some degree of civil war going on right now. It's gotten worse than when I was there. I mean, I read about it all the time, the sectarian violence, all the different groups that are involved. You have, you know, I hear reports of militia backed by the government in police uniforms, sometimes going into places like Adamia, which is a Sunni neighborhood, and killing people. But I don't mean to pick out one group, because there's violence going on between different groups, and there's a power struggle going on. It's more targeted against each other than it was, a year or two ago. And there also is some degree of, foreign Al-Qaeda, whoever they are, doing whatever they want, and their goals are different than a lot of the militias, Iraqi militias, who are interested in, taking care of their own groups, of having power in government. It's a mess. It's basically a mess.
One fast question. The family that you filmed, were they Shiites?
Yeah, the family was Shia.
Okay, thank you.
But the other part of your question is what would happen if America leaves? Which, of course, I don't know. There would certainly be problems. It would create some power vacuum that would, lead to conflict. But things are very bad now. The fighting is going on now. The American presence there may prevent some violence. It's also the reason that a lot of the violence is happening. There is also, you can't discount the violence that they're committing. And we're hearing, recently reports of some of the extreme atrocities that sometimes happen. And of course, if we hear reports of one or two, there are more. The film speaks for itself. My feeling is, America shouldn't have been there in the first place, and whatever they can do to get out of there as soon as possible is the right thing to do. Will that lead to problems? Yes, their presence there will lead to problems. Whatever the goals were, if we were to assume that the goals of going there were to make America safer and to help the Iraqi people, if we accept that, neither of those things have happened. It doesn't work. I don't feel it's made America safer. The current situation for Iraqi people right now, in terms of security, is much worse than it was before the invasion. I'm not talking about Saddam. I'm not talking about, whether things were good, but the realities of their daily life now is horrendous. So, I don't know what should happen or what will happen.
Is there much talk about the fact that the year that L. Paul Bremer was in Iraq as the sort of American emperor, that he pretty much disbanded most of the indigenous Iraqi corporate work, public and private, and that and try to replace it with an American reconstruction business?
It appears that way, and I don't know if that's just him or whether he was responsible for that or who was. But basically, we were talking about this outside. It seemed to me that, assuming there were positive goals behind this whole thing, that there was a window of opportunity after the invasion, that things could have gone much better. The Iraqi military was disbanded. The Iraqi police were disbanded, creating a security problem and also creating huge unemployment. I think 60% unemployment in Iraq.
Also, their technocrats were fired. People who handled water and electricity.
Yeah, all those things. Possibly so that the foreign companies with the big contracts could come in and make money doing some of that stuff. The amount of money, I don't know how many $1 billion was set aside and spent on reconstruction. Very little of that money actually went into the Iraqi economy. I mean, a minute percentage of it did. And if you have 60% unemployment, where most men would be thrilled to be making, $12, $15 a day, if those guys had jobs, a lot of the people you see, especially the insurgents in this film, I don't believe they would give up a $15 a day job to go risk their lives fighting the occupation. You know, the people you see in this film are, almost everybody is Shia. The insurgents are Shia. They weren't fighting very much during the first year of the occupation. They did hope to see an improvement. Doesn't mean they were thrilled to have, you know, foreign occupiers driving tanks around and, you know, doing what they do, but I think there was a chance that things could have gone better.
Yeah, there was a question down here before.
Just a simple question. You've done a splendid job, I think, in capturing the cultural nuances. You said earlier that the film speaks for itself, and I fully agree with that. You've caught so many subtleties. Now, I know more than a little bit about the Near East. And my question is, did you just capture it accidentally, or did you kind of train your eye before going over to catch all of the subtleties that I could just go on and on and on and on about?
I didn't know.
They're all there. If you've got an Arab population to watch this,
Sure.
they'll be thrilled with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of details. Of
Tremendous
course,
amount.
I mean, I knew very little before. I'd never been to the Middle East before. I'd never been in a war zone before. I didn't know much about Arab culture. Now, of course, this is just one group. You know, even in Iraq, there's 27 million people. There are different ethnic groups. Some Iraqis watch this film and feel like I left other aspects of Iraq out, which I absolutely did, because I didn't want to make a film trying. I feel like I can get more by going in depth into one story.
Yeah, but you've got an awful lot of the common denominator. They can't deal with that.
It could, yeah, a lot of things, I mean, about the religion, but, you know, different people have different views of Islam, of course. And I would think, actually, most Iraqis, from my experience, you know, don't connect Islam to fighting the occupation. But like any, you know, military action, usually religion gets sort of co-opted as a part of why we go to war or why they fight the occupiers. So, you know, a lot of the Islam connected to violence that you see in here is not, you know, true to the, you know, majority of.
Did you work closely
Islamic
with the
population.
editor? Or did the editor?
Yeah, we worked closely together. This was a very hard film to edit because it's not a straight narrative that I would have liked it to be. I would have liked to stick more with Ibrahim, but the reality is not much happened. He got depressed. He failed at everything and didn't play out in a visual form. So I did get somewhat sidetracked into what I felt were very related issues, like in terms of, you know, Ibrahim sort of contemplates revenge, but chooses to try to take care of his family. His friends told him to do that because he was the only man left in the family. Two of the guys in that group did go join the Mehdi army and would go and fight against the occupation. I didn't know that for like 2 months, and then I found out that all this time I had been hanging out with, you know, two guys who at night would go fight. And I wanted to go with them, and they said, no, you know, it's too dangerous, we can't take you. So I had to find a different avenue to get access to the same group, but not with the people who had been characters in my film. So I did get access to insurgents fighting against the Americans. Because I wanted to see, you know, if Ibrahim had chosen that path of revenge, that is the group that he would have been involved in. So I struggled
that was
to make
part
all
of
these
his lament too,
connections.
for me, in the sense that was faith, qasmet, as they call it. That was sort of written for him.
That what was,
The idea that he had to, the preoccupation of dealing with the, taking care of his family now that he became the head, you see.
right,
It didn't leave him very many options.
right.
So that's what probably led to his depression.
Yeah, I mean, his brother being killed led to his depression, the whole economic state of where he lives, the fact that he has very little opportunity, all those things, I think, contribute to him being depressed. And also, just he seemed not to be a very mature guy to begin with.
Hi, how old is Ibrahim?
He was 19. I mean, when I was 19, I had trouble taking care of myself. And I didn't live in a war zone, and I didn't have to take care of sisters or mother. And my brother hadn't been killed. So, Rod was mid-20s. I don't know exactly how old he was. But he was a little more responsible. He had started this business that Ibrahim didn't seem to be competent enough to manage.
I'd like to thank you for making the film, and just ask you a couple of questions about the film now that it's made. Have you been on Democracy Now?
No.
Would you like to be on Democracy
Yeah,
Now?
absolutely.
Would people here be good enough to perhaps press for that? I wanted to ask your opinion of the film Syriana.
I haven't seen it.
Thank you.
Short answers.
There's one scene where you were photographing, I guess, insurgents, and there was a lot of gunfire, and you went running over to someone who was down, and a voice off camera told you not to film. But a couple seconds later, you were filming the person being taken away. Then there was someone in the back of the truck, and then there was a corpse. And I'd like to know what happened.
Sure. I'd like to know what happened. Because, I mean, I can give some explanation, but it's confusing. I realize it's somewhat confusing in the film, but the reality is that for me, even being there, it was confusing. To the point of why are people killing people, but that's going a little far. But even, who was shooting, why, was confusing in that moment. That was in Najaf. After there had been 3 weeks of fighting between the Mehdi army, who were followers of Muqtada Sadr, and the American army. And after 3 weeks, there's the Grand Ayatollah Sistani, who is also a Shia, a very important Shia Ayatollah, who I think at the time much bigger following than Muqtada. And Sistani was much more moderate. He wasn't telling his people to fight against the Americans. He, was more interested in diplomatic solutions to what was going on. And this fighting was taking place around the Imam Ali Shrine, which is a very important mosque for Shia Muslims. So Sistani, after 3 weeks, he told all his followers to march to Najaf, to come, peacefully, to come between the fighting and put an end to the fighting in that city, which is very important to them. So I went down to Najaf right at the end of that. And that day, I had just been there for a night, and in the morning, we were watching on the news, Sistani is coming. He was driving up from Kuwait, and thousands of people were following him. And the police came by this one hotel, the only hotel that was open because it was basically a battlefield. The police came by and they said, bring all the photographers, we'll take you to see Sistani when he arrives. Now most of the people, the other journalists said, we're not going with you guys, because the night before, the police had arrested us all. They had gone into the hotel, they dragged us outside, they fired all their guns in the air, they loaded us into trucks and drove us through the city, and lectured us about not writing bad stories about them. They drove us back. So when they came by the next day to say, we're going to be all friendly and take you to see Sistani when he arrives, most people said, we're not going with you guys. But I found myself just stepping into one of their SUVs, and all of a sudden I was driving through this empty city I could hear fighting going on about half a mile away. So we were out in the street for like an hour, and I started to think nothing was going to happen until I saw these headlights, and I saw all these cars coming and thousands of people, and it was Sistani and all his followers. There was also an American base nearby, about 2 blocks behind where we were. And I think the police had orders not to let the demonstrators come in that direction. But this is speculation. I don't exactly know what happened. So they came. At first I thought the police were welcoming them. And then a lot of them started demonstrating, and it kind of got out of control. And they were advancing on the police, and the police were trying to hold them back, and all of a sudden the police started shooting. And I thought they were firing into the air, and I tried to stay behind them and keep filming, and then I saw some of them were firing directly into the crowd. And then one of them fired. I was still filming until one of them fired a rocket, and that was enough for me to like run around the corner. And I looked back out, and that's when I saw, you know, bodies in the street and all the sandals strewn all over the street because they had literally run out of their shoes. So that was a long explanation of a complicated event, but that's what led up to that shooting. I still don't get it. But I ran back over at that point and filmed, you know, there were a couple of bodies behind this guy, and this one guy was screaming while he was lying on the ground. And I ran over and did the most unnatural thing, which is stick the video camera in his face, which to me was exactly the right thing to do at that moment, and it didn't feel wrong. And I even felt like the guy looked at me, and I almost felt this like tacit approval. I could also see that he was just bleeding from his arm, like it didn't look like he was dying. He was screaming, and I was filming. But I was thinking, okay, now I filmed him, what's my next step? Do I help him? You know, do I annoy the... I didn't know what to do. And at that moment, as I was having this sort of crisis of conscience and trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, a policeman stepped in front of me and said, don't film, don't film. So I kind of ran back away. Now I think the policeman wanted me to stop filming, not to cover it up, but just sort of out of respect, because it is weird to film an injured person. And then, you know, at a certain point I managed to leave with some of the police as they were taking one of the bodies away, and that's who I filmed in the truck. I don't know if that answered your question. It's kind of a long...
I think it's amazing. You're standing there in front of us, rather casually talking about the most excruciating and fearful kind of situation. And it's really amazing.
Yeah.
That you were there, that you...
Can't hear you, Vic.
that you were there and you had the wherewithal to stay there.
What I can
You know,
say
you're
about...
talking about it so calmly, everybody else would be cracking in their pants. I mean,
Well, what I mean, that's an interesting point, and I can actually talk about that a little bit, because it is so extreme and bizarre, and in those moments, like, that was definitely one of the weirdest afternoons of my life, seeing people shooting people. Some of those guys got killed, and running over, what I just described, running over to film this guy that had just been shot. And there's still shooting going on, and you're talking about the way I'm talking about now, which is very flat and like matter of fact. And in that moment, I didn't feel anything, except maybe some adrenaline, but no emotions, I knew I was seeing something that was messed up, but I didn't feel anything. And I think that's just a sort of survival thing, a defense mechanism, because it's too much to process in that moment when I needed to be focused on, you know, not getting hurt myself and doing my job. And I didn't really deal with it for like 6 months. I never cried when I was in Iraq, and I saw some bad things. But I did have to deal with it when I came back. Now, what was interesting to me about that experience that I had, was I felt like I got to taste what it's like to be able to kill people, which seems so inconceivable. And yet, at that moment, I saw how easy it was, and how you don't really feel anything. And soldiers sometimes talk about how at first it's difficult, and then they have to do it, and then it becomes easy. And when it gets so extreme, it becomes addictive, because there's a bit of a rush that accompanies it. But it's, once you cross that line that I just got a taste of, is how it becomes possible for, you know, more and more killing and violence to occur. Ideally, you get to do what I got to do, which is come back home, which was not easy. It was much easier to go there than it was to come home. And maybe 6 months after I got back, I started to emotionally connect to some of the things that I saw, which was good. I needed to do that, to process it, because I took it in. You got to get it out, so I could cry about it. And, some of the soldiers keep getting sent back. Some have been sent back for a third time. Now, I think 2 out of 3 soldiers coming back are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. That's out of over 1 million that have been through Iraq and Afghanistan. So maybe, 700,000-800,000 American soldiers have PTSD, which is sounds like, okay, it's just some blanket diagnosis. What that can look like is divorce, domestic violence, suicide, drug abuse, alcoholism, homelessness, unemployment. I mean, big social problems for them, and things that we're going to be hearing about for generations. I think at least 1 out of 4 homeless people are veterans of other wars. Some now, Iraq veterans. It's going to be a big problem that we're going to be hearing about for a long time. And the unfortunate thing is, often when they get diagnosed with this, they get treated with Paxil, or they get given some kind of medication without doing necessarily some of what I had to do, which was cry about it and think about it and even take some responsibility for it. If they just are given drugs, I don't think it really treats it. It just deals with the symptoms. And my understanding is the VA is underfunded by $1 billion for their annual budget, whereas the war in Iraq costs about $1.5 billion a week.
Necessarily in this order, but one, the cinematography was exquisite.
Yeah.
And 2, if I had to find one word to describe this film about war and death, it would be tender. There was something so tender about the way you filmed it, and with such dignity and such respect, that you are really to be commended. What's next?
What's next?
Well, why don't we do that inside? Okay? No, because wait, one last little quick, and then we go.
I just want to make one final comment about the question before about the Civil War. Scott Ritter, who was here 3 years ago, who knows the country better than anyone else here, said that if we go in there and destabilize Iraq by our very presence, that we will get into the middle of a 3-way civil war, which will be like being in the center of a hornet's nest. And that there will be nothing we can do about it except leave, and then when we leave, the civil war will get even worse. And that's exactly what's happening if you listen to the news.
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't you come together and we can talk to the...
Thank you.
The stage in print before the film actually started. And I wondered whether or not that could enhance your own film, because if you know a fair amount about it, you can jump right into it and actually identify with you as the filmmaker. Others might not find it that easy to
Maybe I should do that on the DVD, but I wouldn't know what to write.
Well,
what do I say?
That you're the best one to figure out what that film meant to you.
Yeah.
It's an interesting little exercise that you might want to take on because
what it meant to me.
Because I knew right
like
from the beginning he's with a Shia, and I said I'm convinced that he must have had protection from some pretty high-placed Shia guy. Now this guy must have really been pretty well connected, or he was very sensible. Whether he could speak good English or not didn't matter. You got in and out alive, and for that we're all really grateful. But and I don't think it would have been that different if you were with a Sunni group either, really, except there would have been fewer sort of attempts to call on Ali to save you, as it were.
Yeah, not Ali. It would have been more, I mean, to actual, when I was with insurgents, they were Shia. At the time, it was almost impossible to be with Sunni insurgents. It was much more dangerous. And so that would have been almost impossible. I didn't know the difference when I got there. I'd heard they're Shia and they're Sunni.
How did you get your bearings? You probably answered it inside.
Up my nose, it's one thing leads to another, and then...
I think that's the beauty of his film, as he said more than once. It speaks for itself. It really does. And of course, it's in the eyes of the beholder, and I got out of it quite a lot from my own perspective. But I think you did a great job. I think it's all there. Whether you did it on purpose or by accident or default, whatever, I'm going to say, I think you did it on purpose.
I tried. And of course, I didn't make the film for the money, but it cost a lot of money. So ideally, we'll do a sale to a bigger network first. And then after 2 years, when that deal is expired, it'll end up on something like MTV. Which would be great.
Yeah, that's the right film.
But also because I feel like for them to play it, I'm sort of, I guess, preaching to the choir. And ideally, I want it to be on HBO or on...
They have the most amazing program from 10 to 11. You watch the newscasts from around the world. They have it from the Israel station, and they have it from Lebanon. It's on direct TV. They have satellite. It's an amazing program.
You can't get it over the internet?
I don't know.
Like TV?
It's not on cable.
Like TV?
Yes.
That'd be better.
Is this your first film?
My second documentary. The first was called Urk, which is a fishing village in Holland. Very different story, with some strange similarities, but...
Studying the community?
Yeah, and the North Sea fishing and the dangers and the traditions. And certain similar subjects come up, like faith and faith are a big deal.
Whenever you deal with family and community, that's what you come up with, yeah.
And danger. Like when I went, the first week I went on the North Sea, there was a storm, and one of the ships sank, and a 19-year-old fisherman drowned, and we had to look for him. So that whole experience, and then I went to sea with his brother, so the certain similarities, and they both dealt with it in the same way. Similar ways of trying to understand, was it fate, was this God's will?
That's really weird. What's your next, I didn't know.
Come out on DVD.
First one?
Yeah.
How do you spell it?
U-R-K.
U-R-K.
What they see of Israel, its relationship to Arabs who are like them, what Israel does. I mean, look at the news the past few days.
Yeah, sure.
One might almost say it's perfectly understandable that from a very limited, identifying Jews with a government that is doing what Israel does. So it's a misinformed view, certainly.
So what's your next project?
I want to go to Nigeria.
Have you been to Africa?
Not really. I mean, briefly, Northern Africa, but...
So you want to see what's going on?
Yeah. Sounds like a lot.
Yes, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Were you funded by some political organization?
It was all my own money. Until after I came back, I got a couple of grants from New York State Council on the Arts and the Jerome Foundation. which helps, but doesn't by any means cover the cost.
I thought maybe some political organization might have given some.
No. I mean, I didn't specifically set out to make an anti-war film. I just wanted to make a film about the war, I guess.
That's what people need to see.
Yeah.
Exactly what they need to see.
Treated the whole situation very fairly.
It is what it is. You know? Also, if my goal was to make an anti-war film, films that are so one-sided don't actually accomplish very much. It's like people that agree with it, agree with it. But if you make something that is honest and feels honest, and as a viewer you don't feel like
you could empathize
I'm being manipulated.
with everyone in the film.
Yeah.
And once you could do that, you see there's many sides to the story.
Yeah.
Raj, Group,
Fox.
They have the satellite.
They don't go anywhere.
How do they do it?
They don't leave the hotel. They go on the roof of the hotel. They go to these briefings, military briefings where they get told what the news is. And yeah, they've got a lot more money, a lot more people, bigger equipment, where you can't get anywhere close to the experience of being there.
Yeah, but they get jobs in the government too.
Yeah. So, I'm 34. My background in terms of, I went to Wesleyan in Connecticut. I majored in film, but I didn't really learn anything until I started working.
I went to college, grad school. I didn't learn anything until I started coming here.
Yeah, I'm not proud of that.
This is my education.
It was satellite, so I mean,
Do they present a different point of view? Do they get a pretty broad
yeah, I mean, you can watch BBC. There's no American news except for Al Hurra, which is it's an Arabic channel, but it's paid for by the CIA. But there's Al Jazeera, there's Al Arabiya, and of course,
Have you shopped it yet? Or?
I have an international agent, so we just sold it to MBC, which is Middle East Broadcasting Company. But I don't know what's going to happen domestically with this.
This is a more moderate family, not as religious.
They're very religious, different. It's totally different. Every family's different. They're not all the same. They're like totally unique.
Did you get the feeling that people were angry because they're not living as well as they were before the invasion?
No, I heard Eric was talking
because that's how I see it from here.
They weren't necessarily living well, but
it was safe.
Safe. They could send their kids to school without worrying about kidnapping.
Right.
There was no, aside from the regime, there was no crime. Which is normal in a dictatorship,
Of course, yes, it's only their crime.
But yeah, for most people, their lives are much worse now than before the invasion.
Because we saw the other film that they have here, War Tapes, and a very different perspective. And but yet we were looking, and it was in the middle of the gunfire. The kids were trying to walk to school, and I said, this couldn't have been what was going on prior to the invasion. I was just wondering the anger the people must feel for what they're going through and not seeing any reason for it.
Yeah. It was also more secular society. I mean, some of the religious
kept it that way.
Yeah. I'm not defending Saddam, but some great things. When he came into power, I think the literacy rate among women was something around 5% or 10%, and he raised it to 95%. So if you look at things like that,
I think because I've thought about this a lot.
There were some things that were really good about it.
I guess like you do too. And I think they need just advertising, billboards, people to make it.
Now, I'm not here giving a blind defense of it, but the reality of the situation right now.
It works.
You get a cool billboard with nice colors.